Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Nordic and Baltic Industry Day. This meeting is organized in collaboration between the Department for International Trade and the UK Border and Protocol Delivery Group. My name is Christina Liaus, as you can see on the screen. I am the Regional Director for the Department for International Trade, responsible for the Europe North region, covering all of the Nordic and the Baltic markets. Did you know that each year the UK export to this region amount to over £30 billion worth of goods and services. And at the same time, the UK import goods and services from this region worth around £44 billion. That is a lot of goods and services traded between the UK and the Nordic and Baltic region every year, and this is what we're going to talk about today. Since leaving the EU single market and the customs union, companies and citizens have adopted new processes and requirements. Thank you for that. Thanks also to you guys on the call for the hard work of traders and hauliers, all of you. Thanks to you, we did not experience anything like the generalized disruption at our ports, which many predicted would happen on the 1st of January, luckily. However, during the past months, companies have faced a range of new challenges as we all recover from the general pandemic, which has impacted supply chains all across Europe. This is felt particularly by the agri-food sector, where new requirements of importing goods of animal origin were due to be introduced next month. In recognition of this new situation, rather than introduce new import control at this time, the UK government has listened to everybody and all of those who have called for a new approach to give businesses more time to adjust. Therefore, the UK government has today set out a pragmatic new timetable for introducing full import controls for goods imported from the EU to the UK. Full customs declarations and controls will be introduced on the 1st of January 2022, as previously announced, but safety and security declarations will now not be required until the 1st of July 2022, which will give everybody more time. So this webinar today, I hope you will always also think, as I did, is very timely. You will be able to hear directly from the UK Border and Protocol Delivery Group. You will hear from DEFRA, from HMRC, from the UK Border Force and BASE, exactly what this will mean for your company. I hope you will find this a very useful set of information and contacts for you. If you have questions during the next 2 hours, please put them in the chat and we will pick them up during the webinar and hopefully answer them right away. If not, we will come back to you as soon as we can. So now, without further ado, let me pass the word to Margaret Whitby from the UK Border and Protocol Delivery Group to get this industry day going. Thank you very much. I hope you find it useful. Over to you, Margaret.
Thank you very much, Christina. And we're delighted to be with you all today and the Nordic-Baltic region, virtually at least. So my name is Margaret Whitby and I work in the Border and Protocol Delivery Group. We are part of the Cabinet Office in the UK and we are responsible for bringing everything together at the borders and ensuring that they flow freely. And one of the many exciting things that we do is events such as this. And we have brought together a great team from across UK government departments for you today to outline the detail that you need to continue to export your goods to GB. On the next slide, please, I'm just going to cover a few of the ground rules for the webinar. As Christina said, please do ask questions of our experts in the Q&A function. Here, you should be able to see that at the top of your screens. And we will answer as many of those as we can today. If we can't answer them today, we will take them away and share answers with you in the days and weeks to come. Following this presentation, we'll publish a recording of the webinar on gov.uk and we'll send you a link to that. And we can also make the slides that we're using today available for you. As I said, we'll pick up the questions and share the answers with you if we haven't covered them today. On the next slide, please. We're ploughing through our agenda. We've, after a brief introduction from me on the detail, we're going to have a presentation from Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs. We're going to cover a little bit about the EEAFMD agreement here, just a taster for you. And then we have our colleagues from the Department of the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs to talk about the sanitary and phytosanitary procedures in Great Britain. Border Force are going to tell us, and the Home Office are going to tell us all about identity cards and the requirements there. And the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy will cover the UKCA marking requirements. We'll close the event with a question and answer session. So I hope to pick up many of your questions during the course of the event, and we can put those to the officials here today. Before we get started on that, though, we do have an ask from you. We're running some readiness polls. We'd like to understand how ready people are for GB import controls. If we could move on to the next slide, please. The first question of these is available now on Slido, and if you could take the time to log in, I think my colleague has published a link to that in the Q&A. And the first question there is about moving goods between the EU and GB since the 1st of January. How have you found that? Has there been a problem? That kind of thing. So if you could log into Slido and take part in our poll. We have, I think, 3 questions throughout the event today, and we'd very much welcome your answers to those. On the next slide, please. So Christina outlined the announcement today. This is the first event that we've done since the announcement this morning that the government has listened to businesses, and reflecting the impact of the pandemic, decided to give business a little bit more time to prepare for moving SPS goods in particular. My colleagues in across government are going to talk you through that detail now shortly, but this is a useful slide, I hope, that summarises the changes and the key dates. There is a waiver currently in place for export summary declarations for exports from GB. That will end on the 1st of October. HMRC will talk to you more about that. Our friends in the Home Office will explain that ID cards will no longer be acceptable for entry into GB from the 1st of October, and also an important point to note, particularly for hauliers coming into GB. We'll cover that in more detail. From the 1st of January 2022, so that's next January, import declarations will be required. If people importing goods into GB want to use simplified procedures, they must be approved by HMRC to use those now. That I suppose easement, if you like, ends on the 1st of January. And pre-notification of lower risk plants and plant products and products of animal origin and animal byproducts, and our friends, the high risk food and feed not of animal origin, will need to be pre-notified to GB authorities from the 1st of January. And our colleagues in DEFRA and the Food Standards Agency are here to help you with that detail. So customs procedures have not changed, but the procedures for sanitary and phytosanitary have, as Christine said. From the 1st of July, then, safety and security declarations will be required for imports to GB. Something for hauliers and carriers to note. Export health certificates and phytosanitary certificates will be required for the relevant products from the 1st of July. Pre-notification of all products will be required from the 1st of July, and goods will need to enter Great Britain, SPS goods will need to enter Great Britain through the appropriate border control post, the BCP. I hope that slide helps to summarise the announcement today. We can put a link in the chat to the announcement from the UK government this morning about this delay for some requirements into GB. But that's probably enough for me for the moment. I think I'm now going to hand over to my colleague from Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, Naheed Williamson, to talk us through the customs procedures. Naheed, are you there?
Thank you, Margaret. Yes, I am. Okay, so as Margaret said, my name is Naheed Williamson, and I work in HM Revenue and Customs. And I'm going to talk to you about the customs procedures. There is a lot to get through, so I'll try to make this as helpful and informative as possible. I'll have the first slide, please. Okay, just to give you an overview on customs. So during 2021, importers of non-controlled goods will have the option of using the delayed declarations instead of full customs declarations. This has been useful for importers who have not put in place procedures to make the full customs declarations or been authorized to use the simplified customs processes. So if you are using delayed declarations, you will need to make a declaration in your commercial record at the time of import, as you know, known as entry into declarant record, EIDR, followed by a supplementary declaration, which needs to happen within 175 days after the import. And on delayed declaration, importers need to be authorized for the simplified declaration or have an agent who is authorized, and they will need to have access to a duty deferment account before the first supplementary declaration. This will change from 1st of January 22, and importers or agents will need to be approved at the time of import to use the simplified procedure, or they can still make a full declaration. On the exit summary declaration, from the 1st of October, this will be required on all movements, which means that the current waiver on empty pallets and containers will come to an end on the 30th of September. On the ENS, the entry summary declaration, for imports from the EU, they will now not be required until the 1st of July 2022 instead of 1st of January 2022. Can I have the next slide, please? So on the continuing on the safety and security, there is, as I said, a 12-month waiver on ENS requirements for goods being imported from EU into Great Britain, but from 1st of July, has full ENS declarations will be required. Just to say, this is a legal requirement, which means that the ENS will need to be complete and accurate at the time it is submitted into the Safety and Security GB system, the SNS. And an ENS must be submitted before the goods arrive in GB. We also know that things change through circumstances beyond our control, such as weather or traffic. So there is the ability to change the ENS when you have first submitted it. You can make any amendments right up until the time the goods arrive into GB customs territory. Carriers will have the legal responsibility to ensure that the safety and security declarations are submitted, and of course a third party can lodge a declaration, but it must be done with the carrier's knowledge and consent. I'll have the next slide, please. So continuing that, ENS declarations, carriers, as I said, have the legal responsibility to ensure that the safety declarations are submitted, and the third party can make the declaration with their knowledge. But just to make it very clear that in order to make a safety and security declaration, a GB URI number will firstly be required. The ENS information will hold details relating to things like the consignor, consignee, a description of the goods, and the routing itself with the time of arrival. And as I said, to be able to submit that, you will need to register and have access to the Safety and Security GB service. And once registered on the Security GB service, you can submit the ENS either by purchasing a compatible software or employing the use of a CSP, a community system provider. Can I have the next slide, please? So on the safety and security and the exit summary declaration, it's just worthwhile adding here that this essentially supports the economic recovery from the impact of the pandemic, and just to give businesses a bit more time for the new customs requirements. So there is an exit summary waiver currently in place, as I stated previously, on empty pallets, containers, and modes of transport under a transport contract, and on all roll-on movement of goods, which ends on the 30th of September. But that said, in most cases, the safety and security requirements for export are met using the standard customs export declaration. But where an export declaration is not used, then from the 1st of October, an exit summary declaration must be completed. Can I have the next slide, please? So from the 1st of January, just to give you a bit of a overview on the customs control side, there will be two main standard customs models to control the goods imported into the GB. And this is all to support the flow of goods and minimize congestion. So border locations receiving goods into GB from the EU will be able to firstly operate the tried and tested temporary storage model, or secondly, the new pre-lodgement model. And just to explain, the temporary storage model essentially allows goods to be stored for up to 90 days at the frontier in an approved temporary storage facility before a declaration is made, to allow officials to carry out any checks before they can release the goods from the facility. The pre-lodgement model is for locations where particularly space and infrastructure cannot accommodate the temporary storage requirement. And under the pre-lodgement model, it's really important to make sure that all goods have the appropriate declarations before they board, and that there is clear communication with the person in control of the goods. That would be the driver of a lorry for accompanied goods, or the carrier for unaccompanied goods. And this has to happen by the time they arrive, on whether the goods are clear to proceed or if they need a check. And the ports operating the pre-lodgement model will be ensuring goods are not arrived at that location without a pre-lodge declaration, and ports will need to ensure that they are taking reasonable steps to identify goods for any checks and that they're controlled on arrival. Next slide, please. So just to touch on the GMMS here, as I mentioned about the pre-lodgement control model is in place where ports don't have the space to hold goods on arrival, and the new IT system, the Goods Vehicle Movement Service, the GMMS, has been introduced to operate and support the locations where pre-lodgement is required from 1st of January 22. So GMMS function really allows declaration references to be linked together. So it helps the driver, for example, to only present one single reference, the GMR, Goods Movement Reference, at the frontier to prove all the necessary declarations have been pre-lodged for the goods on the vehicle. The GMMS also will enable HMRC to send notification of any risks, whether these are cleared or not cleared, into the system to the person in control of the goods by the time they physically get to the UK. So they know where they need to go to next. And of course, GMMS also automates the office of transit function to mark the entry of goods in customs territory. Can I have the next slide, please? Temporary storage. Now, on the temporary storage control model, goods coming from the EU can be stored temporarily under the customs control before they're either released to free circulation, exported, or placed under a different procedure, outward processing procedure, or under a special procedure such as a temporary admission. So this actually means that traders can delay making a customs declaration and paying for any duties for up to and taxes for up to 90 days before the goods are presented. Of course, an authorization is required to operate the temporary storage facility. And from January 22, an inventory system will be required then for all temporary storage facilities. So border locations using the temporary storage control model can use GMMS to facilitate the control of a pre-lodged declarations for driver accompanied ro-ro goods and complete the office of transit function. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, just a bit more on GMMS here, mainly in relation to imports from EU to GB, in that from the 1st of January 2021, the MRN entry will be the main requirement for the GMR. And for the exports, that's GB to EU, although export declarations are required from January 21, you will not be able to pre-lodge these using GMMS until next year, which is the 1st of January 2022. I'll go on to the next slide, please. So just to touch on GMMS a little bit more, for hauliers registering for GMMS and being able to create GMR, they will need a government gateway account. This can be an existing or a new account, but it must be the account used to create the GB URI. They will, of course, need a GB URI, which is the Economic Operator Registration Identification Number, for moving goods between EU to GB, access to NCTS and GB security service through CSPs or third party will be required by traders, carriers and hauliers. Can I have the next slide, please? I'm not going to really now cover too much detail here on the process map, because it just sets out a high-level overview on the process of GMMS imports and how goods start and what happens before they arrive and when they arrive at the EU place of exit and prior to crossing. So I believe you'll get these sent to you later. Can I have the next slide, please? I want to touch on transit, which is quite important, and how to avoid common errors. And I want to highlight in this slide some common errors and mistakes when transit movements are not discharged at the Office of Transit or by the authorised consignee. So to explain, when your goods arrive at the destination country, it's important that the transit accompanying document, that's the TAD, is presented to customs at the Office of Destination. This is a customs office or at the premises of an authorised consignee. That could be your own or an agent's premises. So they can inform the NCTS that the goods have arrived. Now, even if your goods have been presented to an Office of Transit at the border in the country of destination, the haulier must still attend an Office of Destination to end the transit movement, and that will allow the guarantee to be released. The guarantee will not be released until the transit movement has ended, and if you do not discharge your transit movement, the guarantee will not be released, and traders will reach their limits on guarantee. And if that happens, the new transit movement cannot begin, and that can potentially cause significant disruption to your own supply chain. I'll take the next slide, please. Just continuing on the transit and avoiding common errors. Now, if a transit movement is closed on NCTS before the goods have left the EU, this will be regarded simply as being legally non-compliant, where a consignee closes off a transit movement before the goods have been received. Now, in these circumstances, if the goods are no longer under valid transit movement, they'll be stopped at the border and possibly held for checks and possibly incur penalties. There have been examples of paperwork mistakes and errors, so it is important to highlight that if the papers are not in order or that the correct information is missing and things like weight, volume or description of goods, then the movement cannot be discharged on arrival and the guarantee again won't be released. Can I have the next slide, please? So just a bit more on this in the declaring the wrong office of departure. Can we have the, yeah, thank you. So in terms of getting the office of declaration right, which is again very, very important, a transit movement can only be started at the office of departure on the declaration, which cannot be diverted. So it must be the location where the goods are presented to border force by the haulier to begin the transit movement. And on the Office of Transit, it's make sure that the Office of Transit you're traveling through is included in the transit declaration. The Office of Transit is the port of entry into the next customs area, not the port of exit being left behind. And to make this process simple and easy, the transit declaration must include each Office of Transit you will report on your journey. So this will help the movement to be processed quickly at each location. And if you're bringing goods into the UK on behalf of someone else, make sure that they are aware of the route that you plan to take in advance so that they can declare the correct office or offices of transit. I'll end that there then. And can I take the next slide, please? So on VAT, just to touch on this briefly, as the slide states, postponed VAT accounting is available to VAT registered businesses for import from anywhere in the world, including the EU, up to 31st December 2021. And there are certain circumstances where importers must use PVA. Now, after that date, the use of PVA will be optional in nearly all of those circumstances. And for delayed declarations or simplified procedures and entry into declarant records, importers must use the PVA. PVA is available but optional to traders who do not use the delayed declarations. And for non-badged VAT registered traders they will be able to pay VAT at the point of declaration. For non-established taxable persons, they are also entitled to use the PVA, but they must hold a UK URI and instruct an agent to make the declaration on their behalf. Can I have the next slide, please? So just a brief overview on excise, because the rules which apply to excise moving goods between GB and the rest of the world will now apply to goods moving between GB and the EU. So in simple terms, excise goods transported between GB and EU are treated as the rest of world movements. That means that goods moving under duty suspension to and from a tax warehouse to the place to enter or exit GB must use the UK version of the Excise Movement and Control System, the EMCS. I won't say much more on the excise. Can I have the next slide, please? So on empty and returnable packaging, since January 2021, an import or export declaration has been required on reusable packaging, and for returned goods relief or temporary commission, the declaration can be now made orally or by conduct. And to qualify for relief from import duty, the reusable packaging must have been in free circulation, UK free circulation, that is, from the 1st of January 21. And for reusable packaging from the EU, it must have been transported to the EU before the end of that transition period and returned before the 31st of December 2021. So and just to finally say that the importer and exporter do not need to own the packaging or the goods in them. But to claim the return goods relief, the importer and exporter should be the same person. Can I have the next slide, please? So just to explain this slide on rules of origin. Now, under the UK-EU Trade Cooperation Agreement for origin preferences, traders need to classify the goods first and check that the goods meet the rules. And to make a claim, the importer can use a statement of origin made by the exporter that the product is originating, or they can use the importer's knowledge that the product is originating. And the registered exporter system, the REX number in the EU, is the exporter reference number, which is required where the consignment has a total value equivalent of €6,000. And in the UK, the exporter reference will be the economic operator and identification number. That's the URI number. Can I have the next slide, please? So, Incoterms. In brief, we know these are the rules that are set by the International Chamber of Commerce, so it's an important part of the process nevertheless, and taking key steps to agree any Incoterms between parties well ahead will ensure that there is a clear understanding on who will be taking accountability and responsibility. So you should be able to share this information with your supply chain. The highlight on the dates is set out as we've just gone through, from 1st of January 21 on import declarations and simplified procedures and registering and using the GMMS, and from 1st of July the requirements for the entry summary declarations for imports. Can I have the next slide, please? Very briefly, I want to talk about the, sorry, I thought, can we have the next slide, please? Okay. Right, okay, is that my last slide? Because I thought there was another slide. Apologies.
That's your final slide. So if you could maybe speak to the other slide, and we'll include it in the pack that we send round to participants after the event.
Do you want me to speak to the next slide, Natasha?
Yes, please.
Okay, do you want to get the next slide up for me, please, then?
Sorry, I think Nahid, Natasha, I think that's the slides that we have. If there's anything else, Nahid, you'd like to bring out for the audience from the slides that you've covered, or any other information that you think might be useful, please by all means do so. We have plenty of time.
No, that's fine, Margaret. That's absolutely fine. Happy to cover any of the EA stuff that if necessary, but happy with what I've covered so far. Thank you so much, and I'll hand back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Nahid. On the next couple of slides, we do have a brief overview of the EEAFMD, where we are on that. And Natasha is going to run through that because unfortunately our experts from UK government departments couldn't be with us this afternoon, but we will continue to pick up any questions you may have in the chat and answer what we can. So Natasha, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. So if I can have the first slide, please. So as stated on the slide, the UK signed a comprehensive free trade agreement, or FTA, with Norway, Iceland and Liechtenstein on the 8th of July 2021. So all parties are now working towards completing the necessary domestic and legal procedures for entry into force. So that's the EIF acronym. And what entry into force means is when the agreement takes effect between the partners. So essentially entry into force will mean that the commitments made in the free trade agreement should be in operation. This won't be hugely different from current arrangements, but it will mean that there's new tariff rates on goods trade with Norway and coverage for services trade. The UK laid the free trade agreement before Parliament on the 16th of July, and subject to partner country readiness, the UK expects the agreement to enter into force later on this year. If I can have the next slide, please. So on this slide, there's a little bit more detail on the free trade agreement itself. So the first bullet, it's the most advanced trade deal that Norway, Iceland and Liechtenstein have ever signed, with gold standard provisions in digital trade, mobile roaming and business travel. It will cut tariffs and offer new duty-free quotas on exports of high quality British food and farm products. And this agreement maintains existing access to duty-free quotas for key British exports like cheese, whilst also offering tariff reductions and quotas on pork, poultry and other goods. Finally, the agreement also recognises the protected status of certain UK wines and spirits, meaning that consumers in Norway, Iceland and Liechtenstein can continue to enjoy great British products like Scotch whisky. So I think that brings us to the end of those slides. If anyone has any questions on that, then please feel free to put them in the chat. We will answer as fully as we can today. And I also have my Department for International Trade colleagues on standby to come back on any sort of more complex queries on that. Thank you. I can't see any questions in the chat at the moment, so I will hand back over to Margaret for now.
Thank you, Natasha. And we can pick up questions at the end if you have any. We're now going to move on to exporting food and drink from the EU to GB, and Anastasia Bernhardt from the Department of the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs is going to cover the detail there for us. Thank you, Anastasia.
Fantastic. Thank you, Margaret, and good afternoon, everyone. So as Margaret has just said, I'm Anastasia and I work for the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs here in the UK. I'm going to be talking you through the new import controls for sanitary and phytosanitary goods entering Great Britain, following the announcement that was made by UK government this morning and which my colleagues from BPDG have already alluded to earlier in today's event. Now, I will be joined later by colleagues for the Q&A session at the end of today's event, and I anticipate that you may well have some questions on this announcement, so we will do our very best to answer them for you today. But as the announcement is so fresh, we may need to come back to you in writing when we have further detail available. If we can move on to two more slides, just to the overview slide that gives you a snapshot of what those updated controls are. So next one on, please. Fantastic, thank you. So I'll begin by taking you through an overview of the changes to import controls that were announced today, before I talk to you in a little bit more detail about health certification, about our IT systems and about groupage methods as well. So the requirement for pre-notification of sanitary and phytosanitary goods will be introduced on 1st of January 2022 as opposed to 1st of October 2021. The new requirements for export health certificates for those products, which were due to be introduced on 1st of October, will now be introduced on 1st of July 2022. Phytosanitary certificates and physical checks on sanitary and phytosanitary goods at border control posts will now be introduced on the 1st of July 2022 also. And physical checks of live animals and high priority plants and plant products will continue at places of destination until you are notified. Now, just to say, also high-risk food and feed, not of animal origin, will also require pre-notification from the 1st of January. And by the 1st of July, it will also need to arrive by a border control post with any other required documentation. So those are the key changes that you need to know as of today's announcement, and I will continue to remind you of those as I go through the presentation to pull out some of those elements in a bit more detail. If we can move on to the next slide. So this slide provides a brief reminder of the controls that are already in force for sanitary and phytosanitary goods, for products of animal origin under safeguard measures, for live animals, and for high priority plants and plant products. Now, you should already be familiar with these, as these came into force on 1st of January earlier this year, but there are links to further guidance available on this slide if you would like a refresher. If we can move on to the next slide. Now, I know that Natasha has just touched on some of the EEA and EFTA agreements, but I thought it would be helpful to speak more specifically about how that applies to sanitary and phytosanitary controls. So for animal products being imported into Great Britain from EEA and EFTA countries that are harmonised with EU SPS standards, the phasing of sanitary and phytosanitary controls will be carried out exactly the same as for EU countries. For commodities where EEA and EFTA countries are not harmonised with EU SPS standards, there has been continuity of current SPS control arrangements since January earlier this year. Now, usually when importing goods into Great Britain from the EU, your importer will raise a pre-notification of the arrival of that good on IPAFS, which is the IT system used to pre-notify the authorities in Great Britain. However, where commodities are being imported from a country that is not fully harmonised with EU SPS controls, some notifications may need to be made by email to the competent authority. Now, just a word on plants and plant products. So the processes for importing into Great Britain from the EU outlined in the border operating model do apply to Switzerland and to Liechtenstein, but not to Iceland, Greenland, or to the Faroe Islands. We can move on to the next slide, please. So, as I've said, from the 1st of July next year, products of animal origin and animal byproducts will need to be accompanied by the relevant export health certificate. What I mean by that, I'm talking about products of animal origin are things like meat, dairy and fish, so anything that's for human consumption, whereas when we talk about animal byproducts, what I'm referring to is any animal parts that are not intended for human consumption. So it is the EU exporter's responsibility to obtain the export health certificate, which will be issued to you by the competent authority in the country from which you are exporting from. A certifying officer authorised by the competent authority must complete the official certificate. They could be an official veterinarian or an official inspector as defined by the relevant EU retained legislation. Now, the EU exporter must send an electronic copy of the health certificate to their importer in Great Britain and ensure that a physical copy of the original certified health certificate travels with that consignment. Your importer in Great Britain must upload the electronic copy of the certificate to IPAFS as part of the pre-notification process. Any official sanitary and phytosanitary documents that are required to accompany the health certificate will be specified on the relevant health certificate. Other documentation may be required depending on the commodity, such as a catch certificate for marine caught fish, and we will come to that in a bit more detail later on in this presentation. If we can move on to the next slide. So if you would like to increase your understanding of what these may look like, I would invite you to have a look at the model health certificates which we have available on gov.uk and which I have linked for you on this slide pack. And you can use these to check the specific requirements for your commodity. Now, I must stress that these are examples of the certificates and that the real certificates will be issued to the relevant competent authority in your country. There are more details about how these certificates are filled in on the link at the bottom of this slide. Now, if you cannot identify an appropriate health certificate, you should speak with your importer in Great Britain and check on gov.uk for an import licence. Again, the link for that is shared with you on this slide. And if there is no import licence available, I would advise that you complete an IV58 form and send it to the Animal and Plant Health Agency. And again, I've included for you the email address that would need to be sent to here. Now, if we can move on to the next slide, so I can talk you in a bit more detail through the changes for plants and plant products. So from January 2022, lower risk plants and plant products will need to be pre-notified. Phytosanitary certificates for lower risk plants and plant products will come in from the 1st of July 2022, when associated documentary checks will also commence. The phytosanitary certificate will need to be obtained from the Plant Health Authority in the country where the supplier is based, and an inspection of the certificate needs to take place no more than 14 days before the consignment is dispatched from the country where your supplier is based. Physical checks of lower risk plants and plant products will commence at border control posts from the 1st of July 2022. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So I will talk to you now about IPAFS, which is the IT system used to pre-notify the arrival of any sanitary and phytosanitary goods. Now, this is an action for your importer in Great Britain to take. Again, as a reminder, because I know we have a change to the dates here, but from 1st of January 2022, pre-notification will need to happen for products of animal origin, for certain animal byproducts, and also for high risk food and feed not of animal origin. So the key thing that you need to remember here is that your importer will need to upload the electronic copy of the health certificate that you will obtain from the authority in the country from which you are exporting from. Now, this system and process will allow for remote documentary checks to take place from 1st of January 2021. On the next slide, I've just given you a bit more of an idea about the kind of information that your importer will need to submit as part of the IPAFS pre-notification. That includes things like what is the product that is being imported, what date will it be imported to Great Britain, where is its final place of destination, and just to be clear here, the person responsible for the consignment must have a UK address and be detailed on the application in IPAFS as well. If we can move on to the next slide. So we often receive a lot of questions about composite products, so I will give you a bit more detail about those. So what do I mean by composite product? So these are things that are for human consumption only. They contain a mix of processed products of animal origin and processed plant products. And processed is the key word here. That processing needs to be an essential component of the food and not just added flavouring or processing. So to give you a few examples, a composite good could be anything from a ready meal lasagna, could be a pork pie, or it could be mayonnaise if it contains more than 50% egg. Now, composite products must follow the stage requirements for products of animal origin, so they will require pre-notification from 1st of January 2021, and from 1st of July they will require health certification and will also need to arrive at a border control post. However, there are a few exemptions, so Goods would be exempt if they contained less than 50% processed animal product, if they contain no meat product at all, and if they meet the requirements set out in the legislation which has been written out for you on that slide. Now, if your goods contain any meat product, more than 50% animal product, then it will need to be pre-notified using IPAFS, it will need the health certificate, and it will need to follow the phased approach that I have set out in line for products of animal origin. We can move on to the next slide. So, groupage is the term that industry uses to describe the commercial grouping of multiple consignments within a single sealed trailer or container. Now, there are 4 models that have been developed for importing groupage loads from the European Union into Great Britain. I will just quickly run through these for you in brief, but if this is something that is relevant to your business, I would really encourage you to have a look at the video link that is contained on this slide. That includes a webinar with a lot more detailed description of how these models work. So first of all, you have the consolidation hub method, whereby different consignments are brought together at a single approved premises. Now, the certification here would take place for all of the individual consignments by the certifying officer, and the group consignments are loaded and sealed before they leave for onward destination. The second model is the sequential or the single model, and this facilitates pickups from multiple different sites. So in this model, certification takes place at each site. A seal is applied to the overall load at each pickup point, removed and replaced at the next pickup. This method is reliant upon a certificate of non-manipulation in order for it to be acceptable. Third method is the linear or the multiple pallet model, which is designed to facilitate pickups from multiple sites with certification at each collection point in the chain. This requires pallet level sealing, and sealed pallets are added to the means of transport and the individual seal number on the pallet recorded on the export health certificate. There is no requirement for a certificate of non-manipulation with this model, but it does require the presence of a certifying officer at each collection point. Now, all of these models I've just described to you can be used in conjunction with each other, as long as the general principles around sealing and certification remain in place. So, for example, traders may wish to blend the linear model with the consolidation hub method. The key thing with the hybrid approach will be ensuring full traceability of all products entering Great Britain. Again, I will just point you in the direction of the video, which will go into a lot more detail than I've got time to go through with you today. If we can move on to the next slide, please. I will now move on to discuss additional certification that may be required for fish. So the import of most fish from non-EU countries have always required validated, illegal, unreported and unregulated documents. You may otherwise hear those referred to as IUU documents. And imports from EU countries into Great Britain have required these since 1st of January earlier this year. Now, these documents can include catch certificates. Now, these must be completed at the point of export by the exporter. It could include a processing statement if the fish has been processed in a country that is not the flag state of the original catching vessel, or it may need proof of storage. Now, that would need to happen if the fish has not been stored in a country that is not the flag state of the original catching vessel. These documents must be completed by the exporter, they need to be validated by the relevant competent authority and then sent to your importer in Great Britain. The importer in Great Britain will then need to send these to the appropriate port health authority or the port of arrival in advance. On to the next slide. So also still on the subject of fish, all third country fishing vessels are required to land into appropriately designated ports. There is a link on this slide which will take you through to a list of those. Now they must submit the relevant port state control form if catching in the NEEAFMD convention area. Third country fishing vessels landing fresh fish into Great Britain are also required to do the following in advance of landing. So submit a prior notification form, submit a pre-landing declaration, send a complete and validated catch certificate, as well as adhering to customs formalities. So EU food approved vessels landing frozen or processed fish will also need to pre-notify on IPAFS from the 1st of January 2022. From the 1st of July 2022, they will also need to land into points of entry with an appropriate border control post and complete a captain's certificate. I would just bring to your attention a link at the bottom of this slide again, which outlines the requirements in full for you. And if we can move on to the next slide, where I will be shortly handing you over to Elizabeth Wilkinson, who will be talking you through identity cards. But just before I finish, I will just summarise for you those key dates that you need to remember. So it's 1st of January in 2022 for pre-notification on all SPS goods. It's 1st of July for health certification for SPS goods. They also need to arrive at a border control post where they may be subject to physical checks. It's worth noting physical checks of live animals and high priority plants and plant products will continue at places of destination until notified. Now, it's just worth saying there may well be additional marketing standards and labelling requirements that you need to comply with in addition to that, and we will come back and provide further detail for those in due course. Thank you very much for listening today, and back over to you, Margaret.
Thank you, Anastasia. And I can see a few questions have come in, and I know your colleague Jack has answered some of those, but we'll continue to keep an eye out for questions and pick them up later. But I will move on now. Elizabeth Wilkinson from the Home Office and Border Force is going to talk to us about identity cards. Elizabeth, over to you.
Hi, Margaret. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for including us on the agenda today. So I'm Elizabeth Wilkinson. I'm here on behalf of Border Force. I'm actually part of our border readiness team, and we've been created as a response to our withdrawal from Europe and the policy changes that have come in. We've been looking at operationalising these changes. So our focus over the last few months has been the phasing out of identity cards that begins from the 1st of October. So I'm just going to briefly kind of run through that with you all today. Hopefully most people on the call will know about this change that's coming in, and we've been pushing the communications quite a lot through our channels, through BPDG as well. Many thanks to them for their opportunities and their channels to push this message through. So it's just a little bit of a reminder of what is happening, and then there's a few Q&As on the end where they hopefully will answer some of the questions that you might be thinking as we go through some of the details. So as I've said, hopefully people will be aware of this, but I'll quickly run through what is changing from the 1st of October. So as you can see here, from the 1st of October 2021, it will not be possible to enter the UK using an EU, EEA or Swiss national identity card. This is except where the holder has applied to the EU settlement scheme or otherwise has protected rights under the Citizens' Rights Agreements. Ultimately, that will mean that for the majority of EU, EEA or Swiss citizens, they'll now need to use a passport to enter the UK rather than an ID card, and that's obviously from the 1st of October. So up until the 30th of September, they can still use their ID card, but from that 1st of October date, we will switch over and the ID card will no longer be presentable. People who arrive at the UK border from the 1st of October onwards with the incorrect documents, as it says here, may be refused entry into the UK. I did say that there are a few caveats around this, the EU settlement scheme and the Citizens' Rights Agreements. Some of these have been altered slightly over the summer as some of our policy has changed and other policy has come into line. So I'll quickly run through them and just point out some of the differences so that you're aware of them. In all of these cases, national ID cards can be used until at least the 31st of December 2025. And that's where they obviously have the settled or pre-settled status under the EU settlement scheme. This second point is one of the ones that has changed slightly. It used to be an in-time application, and that was for the 30th of June when the grace period ended. However, now protected rights have been extended, so now it just needs to be a valid application to the EU settlement scheme, regardless of whether they've received a decision on this. The key point here is that it's a valid application, and they'll be able to continue to use their ID card. An EU settlement scheme family permit, a frontier worker permit, and somebody travelling and as an S2 healthcare visitor, they can also continue to use their ID card. Swiss nationals can use an ID card if they have a visa as a service provider from Switzerland. And another small addition here is that equivalent immigration permissions granted by our Crown dependencies, so that's places such as Jersey, Guernsey, Isle of Man, or a valid pending application to one of those Crown dependencies EU settlement schemes. So it's also extended out to our Crown dependencies as well as the mainland UK. There's a few other caveats in there. So British nationals coming from Gibraltar can still use their ID cards, and Irish nationals using an Irish passport card can also continue to present these as they travel to the UK now. So that's a quick run through of the changes that are coming in and those that are protected to continue to use their ID card, which means that the majority of people coming will now need to use their passport. If I go on to the next slide. Here are a few of the FAQs that we've assumed most people will want to know about their company, their drivers, and their responsibilities as carriers. So I'll run through these really quickly. And as I said, hopefully they do answer most of the questions that you'll have around this. So one of the ones that we know people will be asking quite regularly is what will happen to drivers travelling to the UK without a passport? And in those circumstances, will haulage company owners be fined if an employee does not have a passport? So our advice here is that to avoid a delay and disruption at the borders, all companies should encourage drivers to make sure that they are properly documented for their trip, which will obviously mean a passport if they're not properly documented. So we do have a small plea that you can make sure with your stakeholders, with your drivers, with your carriers, with industry, that message is being delivered so that they know that they need to now have a passport where required. However, if that driver is refused entry or that passenger, for example, the haulage company owners will not be fined where their employee travels to the UK without the correct documentation. But as I said, those drivers may be refused entry to the UK. Next question is, if a driver does not have a passport, will they still be able to enter the UK depending on the goods they are carrying? So the answer to this is no. If they are using an ID card and they don't have the rights to use that, they will be liable for refusal entry into the UK. So we really need to stress that individuals should make sure that they are properly documented for their trip. Also, we know that quite a few drivers, for example, will have worker permits linked to their driver's ID card. So will this mean that they need to carry both their passport and ID card from the 1st of October? And as I just went through there in the previous slide, those with the protected rights and frontier workers falls under that, will be able to still use their ID card to enter until at least the 31st of December 2025 date. Again, another question we consider that people will have is that they've applied for a passport, but it won't be ready until October, and whether or not alternative documentation can be provided. On this, it's still, the change comes into force from the 1st of October. And if they are not entitled to carry on using that ID card, you will be liable to be refused entry. So again, it's the same message that whether you have an application in or an expected application or delivery of a passport, you need to travel on that passport. We won't accept any other document. Just to reiterate on here, it does say that while haulage company owners will not be fined where their employee travels to the UK without the correct documentations, those drivers may be refused entry to the UK. This message has been out there for nearly a year, so hopefully that's plenty of time for people to obtain a passport where that's been necessary. I think, is there one more page of FAQs? Yes, there is. I'll quickly talk through these as well. Do carriers need to check whether a person is eligible to travel on an ID card? So this is for all carriers. Carriers can help support a smooth change to encourage passengers to ensure that they have the proper documents for travel to the UK. While carriers' liability charges will not be imposed where they bring a passenger to the UK on an ID card, this will change in the future. We know that the technological systems aren't in place to allow carriers to check at the moment. So that's why that fine isn't going to be levied against carriers. However, if passengers refuse entry at the UK border, as is now, it will generally be a requirement for the carrier bringing them in to also return them. As a side note on that, the technology should be in place, but there are a few years to wait for that to come in. 2023 to 2024 are the time periods that we're working towards at the moment for that carrier's integration to be available. There is, however, a way in which carriers can check the status of a passenger or a person, whether they have the EU settlement scheme, for example. The people who have obtained pre-settled or settled status under the EU settlement scheme, they will hold a digital status of this. It won't be a paper copy, it will all be digitalised. And it won't be a physical documentation like a card or anything of that variety to be able to show. However, they can use an online service called View and Prove, which hopefully people may have heard of. And this service is to demonstrate what status they have if it's necessary to do so. It's quite a simple process. The passenger needs to log on to the service and generate what's called a share code. And this can then be shared with carriers, and the carriers then use that share code and the individual's date of birth to go into the status information, and their immigration status will become available on that service. The usual obligations to check the validity of passengers' documentation obviously remains in place, and standard carrier removal obligations continue to apply, as we said in the previous point. It also has to be stated that a person is under no requirement to prove their status. However, this is a tool that can be utilised by carriers if they feel like they need to. But it's just to understand that a passenger does not have to use this service, but that is available if it becomes necessary. And finally, I'll wrap up after this. Can travellers who enter the UK using an ID card before the 1st of October use it to leave the UK after this date? So passengers travelling to the UK should always ensure that they have the correct documents for the country to which they are travelling towards, from the UK into. And while they may use a passport or an ID card to travel to an EU country, for us, we recommend that passengers use the same document when leaving the UK as they did to enter where possible. This is to help facilitate the matching of entry and exit records and to avoid any unnecessary questioning. However, anybody who did enter on an ID card would then also be able to leave on that ID card. However, we would always recommend, as stated here, that they use the same documents, and we'd always recommend that a passport over an ID card. I think that's everything that I had. Aware that that was quite a lot of information and hopefully quite a few questions answered. And I'll hand back over to Margaret.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And I think next we're now going to move on to have a presentation from the Department of Business on UKCA markings. Erin, are you with us? Thank you, Erin.
Oh, yes, I'm here. All right. So yeah, today I'm going to be giving you guys an update on primarily the recent extension that was given to the UKCA product marking. So specifically, this extension was for the transition period. So I'm going to give you an overview of how that's impacted the timeline for implementation of both the UKCA and UKNI markings. I just see which slide we're on. Sorry, I'm going between screens right now. Excellent. So first, want to let you all know that this information isn't applicable to certain products, which would be those covered by special rule. So that includes things such as medical devices, cosmetics or construction products, civil explosives, and some eco-design and energy products. So we do have specific guidance available for those on the .gov website, which I would encourage you guys to check out. I'm also going to post some links into the chat when I finish with this that will get you to our basic guideline documents as well. So as many of you may be aware, for goods that require the CE marking, or for most all goods that do, whether that be through a self-declaration process or by third-party conformity assessment testing, they're going to be required to start using a UKCA marking in order for goods to be placed for sale in the Great Britain market. So the deadline for this has now been extended to the 1st of January 2023. So prior to that, you may still use the CE marking on your products, and that will be accepted across the GB and UK and I markets. And you may also begin using the UKCA now, as long as your products have been assessed in accordance with whatever the requirements are for them. Additionally, and going forward, you'll be allowed to use both the CE and UKCA markings on the same product if you like to, and if they're going to be placed for sale in both areas. So let's see, next step is going to be, apologize, notes. So yeah, we have our mandatory is going to, so yeah, the mandatory use of the UKCA is going to begin on the 1st of January from 2023. We have also had an extension to the easement for labeling. So currently, rather than affixing the UKCA marking directly onto your product, you can affix it through either a sticky label or on corresponding documents. That has also been extended. So the requirement for fixing the UKCA mark directly onto your product won't be until the 1st of January of 2024 now. For some people, for those of you who have products where it may not be feasible or realistic, given small size and things like that, there are labeling allowances that we go into more detail again on our .gov UK guidance pages. Let's see, can I have the next slide, please? All right. So nothing else has changed with this extension. It's really just been, we listened to businesses, we've spoken with our stakeholders, and especially with the pressures of the pandemic as well. We wanted to do whatever we can to make sure that businesses have enough time to come into compliance with this. So again, products that previously were requiring the CE marking, which also includes aerosol products, are going to need the UKCA to be sold in the Great British market. For aerosol products, you can continue using the reverse epsilon in place of the CE marking as well. So when it comes to using a UK approved body, conformity assessment bodies within the UK have already automatically become notified bodies. If you're currently having a product that is tested, and assessed, and certified in the EU, you will need to have it also tested and certified by a UK conformity assessment body. However, we do have some guidance in place for the conformity assessment bodies and notified bodies that if you have an approval within the EU, that your conformity assessment body should share that information with a UK conformity assessment body. That doesn't guarantee that it's going to be automatically recognized by that UK assessment body, but we do encourage information sharing, and that has been made explicit. There are also responsibilities for importers. They do need to have their address also affixed to products. Again, if there's not space, that can be included on corresponding documentation. That deadline is still going to be on January 1st of 2023. The requirements for the Northern Ireland market, which is somewhat, obviously quite distinct in so many ways, those have not changed. However, the deadline for the implementation of the UKNI has also been extended to January 1st of 2023. Goods that have the CE marking can be placed for sale on the Northern Ireland market, and that will continue without deadline. It's part of maintaining unfettered access. So again, if you have any questions about those, I am going to pop our guidance links into the chat, as well as so we do have an inbox, or an email address, I'm sorry. So if any of you guys have any queries that you would like us to address, we can't offer specific guidance to individual businesses or about individual products, but we are on hand to help answer questions, point you in the right direction, and get you answers that you need to help you comply. So that will do it for me.
Thank you very much, Erin. And that concludes our presentations this afternoon. Thank you all from across the government departments. And as you'll see, there are a number of questions in the chat that we'll come to in a moment. But on the next slide, please, we've got another question for you, really, a Slido question about which of the following statements best applies to you or your business. So grateful if you could go into Slido and choose between option A, B or C, which one best describes you and your knowledge about the procedures ready to move goods from the EU into GB. Thank you. I was going to now come on to the questions and answers. We've had a quiet afternoon on the questions and answers. I'm wondering if the new timetable has meant that you've all found better things to do today. But if not, let's start with the questions. And I think the first set of questions came in as Nahid was talking. So we'll go to customs first, if I may. Nahid, in one of your slides, you talked about different categories, I believe. Could you explain what they are? I'm assuming that the question relates to the categories between controlled and non-controlled goods. So wonder if you could just summarize those for us as best you can, and perhaps is there a link you could share that sets out which goods are controlled and which are not?
Thank you, Margaret. I'm actually going to see if my colleague wants to step into this one. To basically outline the difference between the requirements for different goods categories, controlled and non-controlled. The link is in the information already provided there. Can I invite my colleague here to cover that? I'm not sure.
Hi Nahid, hi Margaret. Very happy to speak to this one. I agree, Margaret. I think what I got from the question was it was asking about you know, the controlled and the non-controlled goods, and for customs purposes there are slightly different approaches depending on whether your goods are classed as controlled or non-controlled. I have put a link back to reply to the question where to find more information about the different categories of goods and what sorts of things fall into that controlled goods list. So that's in the chat there, and hopefully that's helpful. But just to summarise, you know, from the 1st of January to the 31st of December 2021, if you import goods that are classed as non-controlled into Great Britain from the EU, then you can record the goods in your own records without getting authorization in advance. But if you are bringing in what we call controlled goods, and again what is classed as that is on that link that I've provided, then you will need to follow normal full import declarations rules for that. So depending on what category your goods falls into, you will need to take a different approach with importing. But hopefully by having a look at the information on the link, it should hopefully be helpful for our attendees today to distinguish what category their goods will fall into, Margaret. So thank you, I hope that's helpful. And you're muted, Margaret, sorry.
I just agreeing, very helpful. Thank you, Lindsay. Sorry. So the next question we had, again, staying with customs, was about entry summary declarations. We talked about these not being required now until July 2022, but when they are required, would a business need to submit an entry summary declaration every time they move goods into the GB, or would one cover them for a number of visits? I'm afraid I know the answer to this, but I will let my colleagues from HMRC tell me.
Margaret, we put that one straight back on there to say that ENS declarations, you know, they are a requirement at consignment level, and each requirement will mean that each good that is imported will require ENS. So they do apply to individual good movements, and they don't apply to multiple movements. If you want any more on that, I can invite somebody to talk to you in more detail, but I'm not sure what more detail you might want, other than the fact that yes, the answer is yes for individual ENS declarations.
So entry summary declaration for each consignment?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. And that would, the entry summary declaration is required from the 1st of July through the GB Safety and Security System. Thank you. We had a couple of questions now around about the rules of origin. There was a question about accumulation added to the FTA. Is there anything that you can tell us about that? Any updates about the possibility of accumulation being added to the FTA with the EU?
Is that question for customs again?
Yes, customs if you can. If not, we can take it away unless others on the call feel they could answer it.
I think I will take the origin question away. It's very specific on accumulation, and I won't invite anybody at the moment to come answer questions. So if that's okay, the accumulation question I would like to take away, and we'll come back with a substantive response, Margaret, if that's okay.
Thank you. Okay. There was another question on tariff codes that talked about the difference between EU and GB tariff codes, in that there was no difference. They were using the same codes. Are we expecting any changes there, or will we continue to use the same tariff codes as used in the EU?
I'm not aware of any changes on that, Margaret. But again, that's a very tariff specific question, probably linking in to the same to the origin space. So unless there's something else from the team who want to jump in, very happy for that. But again, I think that's a very specific question, Margaret. It would be very wise to get a substantive, a proper answer on that for you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll make a note of that. Again, one you may wish to take away, but can you talk about which REX number would be used? Should it start with the TTA, as mentioned in the question, or with an SEREX? Or is that something you'd like to take away?
As far as I know, the two specific ones, aren't they? For the REX, it's for the UK, the GB, it's the URI. Starts with the URI, as I set out in my update earlier. Mm-hmm. There is a distinction between the REX for the EU and the GB movements.
Okay, well, if the questioner is still on, if there's anything else they'd like to share with us about that, we can pick that up separately. Thank you, Naheed. That concludes the questions I've seen so far on customs. Moving on, I was going to come to our colleagues in DEFRA, and I know you've been answering some of these in the question and answer, but I just thought I'd bring them out in case attendees have missed the answers. There was a question, and perhaps you covered it in your slides, Anastasia, about the catch certificates, the IW products. There are some issues in countries getting authorizations to issue these documents, which prevents the sending of fish to GB. Are we having discussions about this? Is there any hope that you can offer the attendee about work ongoing on this?
Thanks, Margaret. I'm hoping my colleague Stefan May is on the call, who is much more of an expert in IUU than I am. And I can see he's just come on video. Welcome, Stefan. Thanks for joining.
Hello. Yeah, I mean the IUU regulation came in on the 1st of January 2021. So in theory, we've been expecting the full suite of IUU documents from that date, which includes kind of catch certificates, processing statements, and proof of storage where required. So processing statements, they're only required if it's processed in a state or a country other than the flag state of the vessel. So I guess if it's been, caught in Norway and processed in Sweden or something, then it needs separate processing statement. If it's processed in the flag state of the vessel, then all we need is a catch certificate. But yeah, we are aware that some countries are struggling to get these processing statements. We have asked port health authorities to take a pragmatic approach. It's down to port health authorities themselves. They're the competent authority for our imports, and I don't think we've had any issues up to date. So I think we're hoping that port healths are going to continue to take that pragmatic approach while we work with other countries to enable them to meet that criteria. I think that's probably about it on that one.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Stefan. The other question is, and I think I saw an answer to this one, but there was a question about the export health certificates, and when they come into force in July 22, do they need to be signed, or can they be done electronically, Anastasia?
Thanks, Margaret. I will hand you over to my colleague Jack Stacey or to Lisa Ramsey if they're around to answer you in a bit more detail than I can.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Anastasia. Yeah, I can see that Layla's also provided a response. I don't think my reply went as a reply, but yeah, the answer is that the export health certificate will need to be signed by the relevant authority in the exporting country, and that will also need to accompany the goods on their transport.
Thank you very much. Unless I'll just double check that there are no new questions for our colleagues in a couple of questions coming in from for Erin, but no new questions about different products, but we'll keep an eye out. So Elizabeth, moving on to you, there was a question about the position on frontier workers. Would you be able to cover that off for us, please?
Oh yeah, hi. Yes, I did see that one. I'm going to go away to my PBS colleagues. They are the points-based immigration, and I'll come back with a clarity on that because I'm not too sure myself. But I'll come back to you on that one. Thank you, Elizabeth. And Erin, we're seeing a late run on questions on CE marking. The first of those was about whether a good can continue in the UK market if it has a CE mark, only if it had a CE mark, I should say, approved before January 2021. Is that correct for medical devices in particular?
Yes, so I would advise to double check with the specific guidance for medical devices, because that is something that MHRA also deals with as well. But yes, across the board, we could say that for goods that have been placed on the market, which just means that they've been made available for sale prior to 1st of January 2021, they may continue as is using the CE mark alone. Also, for goods that are placed on the market from now until the end of this transition to 1st of January 2023, they may also just have the CE mark. Okay.
Thank you.
I hope that was clear.
Thank you. I think it was. But I know our questioner will come back to us on the Q&A if we have any follow-up questions. We have another question now about CE equipment. Is it okay to continue to use this in GB, I assume, after 2023, or does it have to be updated by the importer? The company here is renting goods and they hold the CE certificate in stock for up to 10 years. So will that be all right?
So yeah, if you're holding on to stock for a long time and if it's considered to already be in use, that CE marking that it currently has is perfectly adequate.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And I think, Anastasia, we're coming back now in a more recent question about getting deliveries from the EU into Northern Ireland and goods that are being transited through GB. Is there anything you'd like to say about the procedures in place for that at the moment, or is there guidance you can point to that might help? This company seems to be struggling with getting the goods moved through in that way.
Thanks, Margaret. I'm afraid I'm by no means an expert on Northern Ireland movement, so I think we'll have to take that one away for you today.
Thank you. Okay, we can do that, but I'm not going to hold you to fortune, but I think we could say there should be some guidance available for that, and if not, I will be sharing some information shortly where you can send more detailed questions if that guidance doesn't cover you. Thank you. Well, I think that concludes the questions that we've been asked this afternoon. Thank you very much to all of our presenters and to our attendees for asking questions and being a lively audience. I wonder if you could move on to the next slide, please. So there's lots of guidance published on gov.uk. We have a border operating model. There's a haulier handbook available. We're going to continue with our engagement across the EU at events like this, in a series of webinars that will cover step-by-step procedures and these wider webinars covering a wider approach. Now, we had hoped to do a lot more with you today. We had hoped to develop some particular case studies of key goods and moving those in. But unfortunately, I think with the time constraints and the announcement coming this morning, we felt it was important to make sure that the material we were presenting was correct. So we focused on the key and basic material. But please do rest assured we are happy to come back as a team from across UK government officials and work with our colleagues in the Department of International Trade based in the Nordic-Baltic region to deliver the kind of events that you're going to need in the run up to January and into next July next year. So as part of that, our final Slido question will now be published on Slido, and we're asking you how useful this was. This event was, and if you're not getting everything you need from that, please do take note and explain to us what more we could do to help you to ensure that your goods continue to flow from the EU into GB and that you understand all of the procedures that are coming in place. And also, if you have a moment, let us know when you think would be the best time for us to come back to you with more detail. I'm conscious that businesses want to and have started to prepare early, but we'd like to get the timing of these events right so that they're meeting your requirements as best we can. I think that was pretty much all from me, but I'd just like to invite my colleagues from DIT and across government if there's anything else they'd like to add, as we've finished quite early. Not only are we giving you more time to prepare, but we're also giving you more time back this afternoon. Colleagues, is there anything else you'd like to say or add? If not, I'd like to thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We will be publishing this webinar, we'll be sharing the slides and sharing answers to the questions. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.